It was supposed to be a routine patrol, but it quickly turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. I was in my 20s then, still new on the force. When I was asked to drive the route that wound through our local state park, I didn't hesitate. A part seemed safer than the streets I normally patrolled. A little peace and quiet would be nice, I thought. I wish peace and quiet was what I found that night. I was driving slowly along the narrow, unpaved road, scanning the dense forest for any suspicious activity. The night already felt like a ghost hunt. I didn't understand what I could possibly see out there. Busting the occasional teenager who had snuck out of his parents' house to meet up with some friends didn't exactly feel like a good use of my time. Still, I have to admit that the place did look a little eerie. Fog and moonlight were all I could make out in those woods. Maybe I'm remembering it worse than it was because of what happened, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't both bored and a little anxious out there. That's when I heard it. A high-pitched growl seemed to come from all directions. It rattled my windows and sent a crawling chill down my neck. I stopped the car and got out immediately. We aren't trained for that kind of thing. You understand? We're not trained for the weird or uncertain. I didn't know what to do except step out and announce myself. I pointed my spotlight on the woods and yelled, hoping that someone might call back. The silence urged me forward, even though my skin was itching and my brow was covered in sweat. I needed to know what had made that noise. I saw it. I've spent years wishing I hadn't. It was standing on two legs, covered in thick fur that shone white in the moonlight. Its head was like that of a wolf, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to peer right through me. Its claws were sharp, and its teeth were bared. I froze. My fingers strummed the leather latch that held my gun in its holster. I couldn't bring myself to draw it. Then the monster lunged. I fumbled for my weapon. It was too late. Its claws tore through my uniform, and I felt it rake my skin. I fell to the ground, still trying to fight back. But the creature was too strong. My firearm was kicked away in the commotion. Plan B was to call for backup. I had to get my voice out on the radio. Then I had to get to safety. I got my thumb on the radio and screamed for help. The man on the other side reassured me that the other officers were on the way. That was good enough. My eyes were frantic as I wrestled the beast's claws, trying to keep it from causing any permanent harm. I felt like I was holding back the jaws of a shark. I couldn't get back in my car with the monster between me and the door. I needed another option. I was close to the old ranger station. The building was run down and abandoned, the result of mismanaged city funding. But there were 4 walls and doors that I was confident would still lock. For a moment, I doubted that route of escape. I wouldn't just have to worry about the creature above me. The old station was said to be haunted as well. Staring a monster in the face, I was willing to believe every ridiculous story I'd heard about the abandoned facility. The next time the animal cut me, I snapped back to reality. I had to move. I knew that I had to make it there if I had any chance of survival. A lucky kick bent the creature's knee in the wrong direction, and its growl was replaced by a sharp yelp. I managed to crawl on my hands and knees, using trees and rocks as cover, always toward the ranger station. Every time I looked back, the creature was still chasing me, its eyes burning with a strange intensity. I saw its nostrils flexing in the moonlight, searching for my scent, even when its eyes couldn't find me. Finally, I made it. The door creaked open as I pushed it, and I stumbled inside, barely conscious. The station was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Strange noises were already coming from the corners of the room, and the air was thick with a musty smell. It was better than being outside. I reminded myself that the sounds I was hearing were likely coming from the creature, scratching at the walls. I was sure that I was inside, especially after I barricaded myself behind an old office door. The fear I felt only climbed while I sat huddled in the corner. I wanted to wake up from the dream. What I was facing couldn't be real. Certainly my drive through the park wasn't going to end like this. When backup arrived, I was saved. They didn't see the creature. They didn't see any signs of it, except for the scratches on my body. I was told it was a dog attack. When I tried to argue, my superiors forced me to take an extended leave from the job. I was told to forget about the creature. Otherwise, I'd never return to the force. Why would they do that? I did as I was told. I kept my mouth quiet. When other reports of odd sightings come in, I took the reports, and I ignored them. The rest of the men around me did the very same. Was I wrong for that? What else could I have done? The years have come and went since that terrifying day. It won't surprise you when I say that I still think about it. There are some things out there that are just too strange, too inexplicable, even for the people who carry a badge and a gun. If you see them, be careful. Fishing is pretty much my favorite thing to do. There's a campground near the McCloud River in Northern California where I used to go to get away from everything. It's a pretty secluded area near Mount Shasta. Someone acquired the land up there in the early 1900s and built a fishing lodge. There were also a couple of cabins and an apple orchard. For whatever reason, maintenance wasn't kept up on the lodge and it deteriorated. So it basically just became a remote campsite near the ruins of that old lodge. I liked it up there and could generally have a nice solitary time with only an occasional other person showing up. The orchard had gotten wild and gnarly, with the branches of the apple trees all bent over and arched. Those old trees still produced the sweetest apples, though. There was a lot of long, thick grass that you'd have to walk through when you were hiking up the river. I had been camping there alone for a few days in the middle of the week, and the place was pretty empty. I had gone through the bulk of my food, so I was looking forward to having some trout for dinner. There was a spot upstream where I typically had success, so I headed up there. I was walking through the orchard and was whistling as I went. I always tended to do that, so I wouldn't surprise any wildlife. But then, I got a surprise myself when I saw a black bear pop its head above the long grass and look at me from about 30 yards away. Apparently, it had been lying on its back under an apple tree, pawing up at the low branches. It must have heard me coming and set up. It was chewing what I assumed was an apple and looking right at me. It was a very large bear. I couldn't really believe it at first, but I kept calm and started walking backward down the trail. The bear seemed completely unconcerned with me. I had encountered black bears a couple of times before and hadn't had an issue with them. I got down to the river and went downstream instead, away from the orchard. I put about a mile's distance between me and the bear. I stayed alert though and kept checking around to make sure it hadn't followed me. I eventually relaxed and got into the fishing and caught 2 for dinner. I got my fish wrapped up and started heading back to my campsite. I was walking on the trail that was a few yards above the river. There was a part of the pathway that went through some very thick brush. There were trees on either side that created an archway over the top of this section for around 100 yards or so. It was a twisty part of the path and about 5 feet wide. There were blind turns every so often. I felt like I was going through a tunnel of sorts. As I wound my way through, I realized I had stopped whistling. I started smelling this really strong scent of urine, and I felt like something was following me. My heart started pounding, and I felt trapped in that tunnel. Then, almost at the same time, I heard this loud howling sound behind me and a grunting, growling sound in front of me. I couldn't imagine what I had gotten myself into. Was I being cornered by 2 bears? That didn't seem like a thing that could happen. Then I definitely heard some rustling behind me. When I looked around, to my shock, I saw something that didn't fit the description of anything I had ever known. It was some kind of beast, standing on its back legs, with a massive head, like a wolf or a dog. It must have been over 6 feet tall. It had a humped back and massive shoulders, with a thick mane of hair around its neck. It lifted its upper lip and snarled. The fangs were terrifying. Its eyes were yellow and slanted. The horrible smell was definitely coming from that monster. It was only about 20 feet away from me. I was frozen in place. But then the other grunting sound caught my attention again. I turned my head in the other direction, and around one of the blind corners came the huge black bear I had seen earlier. I can only assume it was the same one. It was about 15 feet in front of me, standing on its hind legs, grunting and huffing. I was so terrified, I couldn't help but let out a loud shriek. I literally couldn't believe my situation and genuinely thought I must be dreaming. My adrenaline caused my body to start shaking. I pretty much just cowered in the bushes and contemplated playing dead, when all of a sudden, the bear's eyes zeroed in on the creature behind me. It roared this incredible roar, and with a giant leap, it charged at the unknown beast with a fury that was incredible to see. It went past me like I wasn't even there. I have never seen an animal behave so ferociously. The other creature immediately turned around and took on faster than you could possibly believe. You'll always hear about how fast cheetahs are, but I swear, this thing was at least that fast. It seemed to accelerate 0 to 60 in just a couple of seconds. I was standing there shaking and was still holding my fish. All I could do was start running toward the relative safety of my campsite and truck. I looked behind me, thinking if the bear didn't catch that thing, it was going to come after me. I was sprinting as fast as I could. I got to the campsite without anything following me and threw everything in the back of my truck with record speed. I tore out of there and just kept screaming, "What the effing hell?" over and over. I was traumatized beyond belief, and I definitely haven't gone back there, which is really too bad. This happened to me and my grandfather one night a few years ago. We raise sheep in North Dakota, have been for years. It's a family tradition as far back as the 1800s on the same lands as well. We are one of the lucky few who have been able to keep our family land. We had just got done bringing the sheep into the fold for the night. They seemed to be a little on edge. The dogs as well. My grandfather and I stayed outside for a bit, just to make sure there wasn't something in the area. Coyotes are the usual suspect, but we've seen wolves in the area as well. The sheep seemed to calm down a bit, and we figured they'd be okay with the dogs standing guard over them. We went inside to eat and rest from the day's work. After supper, we sat around the fireplace with my mom and my grandmother and talking about what happened during the day. We heard the dogs going nuts. Then I reminded my grandpa about the sheep earlier in the night. We grabbed our rifles and went outside. We took the ATVs out to the sheepfold and looked around. The dogs were acting weird. They weren't acting like they normally do if a coyote or wolf is in the area. Usually with that, they're kind of excited, but wary at the same time, paying attention to the area that the other animal is at. That wasn't the case that night. The younger dog was lying down in the grass, trying to look as small as possible, howling and barking. The older dog was running around in a circle, barking and whining, and looking back at myself and my grandfather. We drove up a bit to look out at the fields and the stands of trees that were out there. There's mostly open grass around our property, but there are areas where there's trees and brush, you know? I turned on the spotlight on my ATV and moved it around, trying to see anything I could. It was my grandpa that called out, and I heard him fire his rifle. I drove over closer to him and asked what he saw. I have never seen my grandpa scared before. Not once in my life. His eyes were wide, and his face was paler than it should have been. He told me he saw something big, really big, bear-sized big, but it was fast, and it was moving between the trees and a small hill just north of where we were. I looked out, focusing my light, and I caught a pair of eyes. You could see the glow from my light shining on them. That's when it moved, and I could see what my grandpa was talking about. It was wolf-like, but its head was large and boxier, with a heavier jaw. It moved on all fours like a wolf, and it was fast. It started to run, but not away from us. It was trying to circle around us and try to get back to where our sheep were. We drove the ATVs after it, following it with the light and our rifles. My grandfather would stop and fire at it. I'd do the same. We didn't hit it, I don't think, but it would hear the rifle and change its direction. This thing could have easily overturned my ATV, I think, if it wanted to. It was big, the biggest wolf I'd ever seen. We chased it for a mile, I'd say. Eventually, it disappeared amongst the hills and woodlands that border our property. We stayed outside on watch for another hour, but didn't see it come back. The dogs had calmed down, and the temperature was starting to fall. We decided to head back inside, then call it quits for the night. In the morning, we were missing 2 of our sheep, and there were strange tracks and gouges in the earth around the sheepfold. Our 2 dogs were huddled in the corner with the sheep around them. We decided to take the ATVs out again and see what we could find. There was barely anything left. Even the bones were gnawed to death for the marrow. I had never seen anything like it before. Neither had my grandpa. Usually you'll find more after the coyote or wolf takes one of the herd. We've experienced it before a few times. We found tracks too. Large tracks that resemble the wolves' or dogs' tracks, but something like 3 times as big. We continued driving around. Maybe we'd see the things still in the area, or find something else. We came up short, unfortunately. We contacted the authorities when we got home. The sheriff came out with some of his men and went over our property. Apparently, we aren't the only ones who have seen this thing. We were the 3rd. 2 other ranches have reported the same sightings, the same loss of animals from their properties. 2 sheep from our ranch, 3 from down the road, and 1 calf further west. All had described the same thing, an abnormally large wolf on their property, stealing their animals, or being shot at by the ranchers. One could have sworn he'd hit the thing, but we didn't see any wounds on the damn thing. The leading theory, according to the sheriff, came from one of the visiting vets that came to one of the ranches. She thought it was some wolf with a strange growth deformity, something like gigantism, a genetic deformity that affects animals and people alike. I don't buy it though. I know what I saw with my grandpa. It bothers him especially. He's been staying out later and later with his rifle, watching over the sheep. I stay with him as long as I can, but if that thing comes back, I don't know. We can't stay out all night. We need to sleep at some point. We haven't had an incident in a few months now. Nothing but the normal coyote or fox, which we've easily scared off.